Mr. President, we're going to vote on a very important piece of legislation later on this afternoon. And this is a bill that's going to move revenues from 46 states to 4 states. This is no small thing. Let me just tell you a little bit about what this bill will do. Well, the revenue generated from oil and gas drilling on federal lands offshore is one of the largest non-tax revenue streams for the federal government. These oil and gas resources on public lands offshore belong to all of the American people. They are public resources that belong as much to someone living in Massachusetts or Kansas or California as they do to someone in Louisiana or in Texas. These are resources that should help every American, not just a select few. The revenue generated from these public resources goes to the federal treasury to help to pay for Medicare, Medicaid, education, our Defense Department. It helps to pay for everything, including reducing our federal deficit. However, in 2006, the 4 Gulf states, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas, succeeded in passing a law that is going to direct an ever-increasing share of these offshore drilling revenues away from the federal treasury to just those 4 states. By redirecting this revenue, that 2006 law is going to take money that should benefit taxpayers in all 50 states and send it instead to just 4 states. And so how much money are we talking about? Well, in that 2006 law, over the next 60 years, it is projected to send $190 billion away from the Treasury, away from the 46 other states, other than the 4 that are Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. That's the problem. Those are the numbers from the Interior Department, $190 billion. But now, the Gulf states are coming back for more. The legislation that we will vote on today would divert an additional $5.4 billion over the next 40 years away from 46 states and to the 4 Gulf states. That's on top of the $190 billion which they're already going to get. So, if you come from one of these 4 states, you should absolutely vote for this bill today. You should put out a press release today touting your support for this legislation. If you can pass legislation to take an additional $5 billion directly from the pockets of the taxpayers in the other 46 states and send it to your states, that will be one of your greatest legislative victories of your career. But if you come from the other 46 states, there is no reason in the world that you should support this legislation to take even more money from your taxpayers and send it to Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, and Mississippi. And that's all that we're really talking about here. A massive wealth transfer from 46 states to those 4 states. At a time when my friends on the other side of the aisle are saying that we need to cut spending to crucial programs that help our seniors and that help low-income Americans and that help students, we simply can't afford to divert $190 billion away from our national priorities and to the Gulf states. And we certainly can't afford to divert $5 billion more, as the legislation before us today would do. The proponents of this legislation argue that this revenue is needed to pay for past and future infrastructure demands and to ensure the resiliency of natural resources. Well, the Gulf states have already been getting revenue from offshore drilling in waters near their states for decades, and now most of the fines, $20 billion, from the BP oil spill are rightly going to the Gulf states that were affected by this catastrophe. And we should find coastal restoration and climate resiliency as a big issue for all states. But this legislation is not about eroding beaches and wetlands. It is about eroding our ability to pay for our national priorities. And this legislation would go even farther by trying to bribe other cash-strapped states into allowing expanded drilling off the East Coast and in other areas offshore. We haven't passed a single law to improve the safety of offshore drilling following the BP oil spill, but this legislation would try to incentivize new areas to drill in and to risk, ultimately, a spill off of one of those states' coasts. Fishing off the East Coast produces roughly $1.75 billion in direct value for our states and more than $4 billion in total economic activity each year. Tourism on the East Coast generates hundreds of billions of dollars in additional economic activity and supports an estimated 800,000 jobs. That is what we would be putting at risk on the East Coast, as this bill would do. And as we learned from the BP oil spill, offshore spills don't respect state boundaries. We would have no protections whatsoever.